With that, we'll call the committee to order. We have a motion to go into executive session. Have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Ayes. Any opposed? The ayes have it. And we'll open it up. List of agencies. Start with the Department of State. Department of State. Last I knew, you had a request for 600 and whatever, 400 and something, and then 90K. So I'll let you talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We saw the amendments that you proposed and are supportive of both of those, with the understanding that the amendment that was made in the House on one of the bills is addressed in Committee of Conference. I think they put some language in there that was didn't really reflect what they wanted. And I'll let Deputy Secretary Hennessy just explain the details of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin Hennessy, Deputy Secretary of State. Are we talking about SB 157 as well as SB 70 or just SB 70 at this time?
I guess we're talking about anything that you want to talk about. The briefing books that we've got here talk about an amendment 1669, amendment 1667, amendment 1680, which I don't know that.
Thank you. So your amendments to address the appropriations needed for SB 70 and SB 157 as passed by this body are exactly what we asked for, and we appreciate the funding.
Let's break this down into sections. So does anybody have any comments on that one? Yes, ma'am.
Which one are we talking about?
I'm in the briefing book,
These two?
and we're on number 1 right now.
My question is, could HAVA funds be used instead of general funds?
No.
Okay.
It probably violates the intent of the HAVA funds because it was very specific in there when the HAVA funds were giving to us what they could be done with them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the law provides that we can spend 1/12 of the money that are in the HAVA funds at any given time. That 1/12, roughly $1 million, funds the ongoing programs that are mandated by the Help America Vote Act. That includes the extensive training that we put on for local election officials before every election. It includes the creation and the ongoing maintenance of the statewide voter registration database. It provides for the accessible voting equipment that is in every polling place, and right now we're on our 3rd generation of that. It provides for voter education, which we've been doing a lot more of over the last couple of years. And it provides for funds for the Attorney General's office to enforce the provisions of the Help America Vote Act. So the $1 million roughly that we spend covers those items exclusively. If we spend more than that, then we spend down the principal and to an unsustainable level. And at some point, if we do that, we'll have to continually dip into the state general funds to pay for the HAVA program.
Any additional questions on this item? Do we have a motion? I'll move to approve. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. Second item on the list is the 90K for the additional support of various things, and I guess I'll let you talk again.
Do you want to take it on?
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Senate passed SB 157, which expanded the post-elections audits that this body had passed a couple of years ago, which we implemented or 1 year ago, and we did it in our primary and general elections this past year. The audits were very successful, and 157 continues those audits, and the funding of $90,000 is what we would need to continue to do those audits.
Okay, discussion? On this particular one, the House has amended 157. I'm not sure that I like all the amendments in 157. That the Election Law Committee is weighing in on whether they're going to concur or request a committee of conference or non-concur. So
Should we hold on this?
it probably would be a good idea to hold at least until we, get a sense of the committee, what they want to do. The way that 157 was originally written was for just the AccuVote machines, and that the funding for that would go away. When the AccuVote machines go away, it certainly is my intent that every new machine that comes online would have its own audit plan tailored for that type of machine. Certainly this funding would, or the funding for what we're doing, I would believe would be needed for those others, but so if there's no other comment, we're going to hold on that one for Deputy Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In discussions with the House Chair and Minority Leader, I believe that they would like you to request a committee of conference when that bill comes back to your election committee. I think they agree that they made some unintended changes to the bill
Okay.
that increased the cost.
Well, we'll see how the committee responds. We're polling the committee right now, so. Okay, and moving on to number 3. Senator Rosenbaum.
I would like to offer amendment 1680S. This is language drafted by Commissioner Arlinghouse to bring together his department with the Secretary of State and HHS to look at what it would take, what it would look like if we wanted to move vital records back to HHS and be like the 49 other states. The chief benefit of doing that is that the privacy rules and privacy and security rules of HIPAA would be in effect on all of the data that includes protected health information. Doesn't move the department, it just asks them to get together and look at it and report to the fiscal committee before the November meeting.
Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We oppose this amendment. And the reason that it's being suggested as to why this might be necessary is the federal HIPAA law. I have not had, nobody has been able to explain to me what HIPAA will do if Vital Records is under that agency that protects the records any more than they currently are. That's after conversations with administrators in Health and Human Services. That's after a conversation with our State Attorney General. And I think that the suggestion of HIPAA is confusing in terms of where the Division of Vital Records should be located. There are very good reasons why Vital Records should be under the Department of State. And start with the state constitution, which in Part 2, Article 68, says that the records of the state shall be kept in the office of the Secretary. That's stated in the Declaration of Policy, Purpose, and Scope of the Vital Records Administration under RSA 5C:3, which says the New Hampshire Constitution identifies the office of the Secretary of State as the keeper of the records of the state. And then it goes on to say that the division shall provide access to vital records and vital records data while assuring the privacy of all New Hampshire citizens. Outline the confidentiality requirements for vital records, set forth the procedures, conditions, and criteria for release of information regarding vital records data and statistics, enforce the provisions of this chapter in regard to the collection, maintenance, and dissemination of vital records information. And then it shall establish, in conjunction with the Department of Health and Human Services, the procedures, conditions, and criteria for the release of information regarding vital records data and statistics for health-related research pursuant to RSA 126:24D, and that's a Health and Human Service statute. So what are the records of the state involved here? Vital events, which means births, adoptions, deaths, fetal deaths, marriages, divorces, legal separation, and civil annulment. And those of you who have been up to the archives, to the research room, know that it's a major center for genealogists who want to go up and research the public data. It makes sense to have that collection at the state archives, excuse me, because of the additional information that's contained there. The RSA 5-C:4 talks about the responsibility of the state registrar under the Secretary of State to keep the information of vital records that is to be confidential private. The statute says that in collecting information, prime consideration shall be given to the protection of the privacy of the individuals about whom information is given. In accordance with the provisions of this chapter, the Secretary of State shall ensure that when information is collected, the minimum of data shall be collected to accomplish a specific purpose, that no information shall be available to unauthorized persons, and that only the minimum be made available to authorized personnel, and that no information that could possibly adversely affect an identified individual be made public. Part of the requirement, well, first of all, Health and Human Services is an organization that has unrestricted access. I should say it has 24/7 access to the vital records data. As part of the extensive memorandum of understanding that we have with the Department of Health and Human Services, they identify which individuals have access to the data and to what extent that access exists. Over the more than 20 years that the Division of Vital Records has been with the Secretary of State's office, I'm not aware of any instance where release of data inappropriately has taken place. Our department protects the data, and we take that protection very, very seriously. There are other agencies that have a direct, tangible interest in the data. One is the retirement system, and the others is the correction system. And again, those agencies only get the information that is not required and necessary for them to fulfill their functions. There are opportunities for academics, both individually and organizations, to be able to acquire vital records data, but that is done through DHHS and an institutional review board that they have there, where those requests are reviewed, and if the requests are deemed appropriate, the institutional review board is the one that makes the decision whether that information is available. The law does specify that that the Division of Vital Records is able to enter into contractual agreements along with Health and Human Services to provide important information that is collected to be given to the CDC for their research and information. The Division of Vital Records does not determine what information is collected. That directive is given to us by DHHS or the Federal Health and Human Services. I will say that the Department of State, the Secretary of State, as the keeper of the state's records, has responsibilities to keep private and confidential information far beyond the Division of Vital Records. We have the Division of Archives and Records Management. We have about 100,000 boxes of agency records, and those boxes contain all kinds of data, both personal and otherwise, from every state agency that we have. And there have been no issues that I'm aware of in the ability to keep those records confidential and managed as required by the statute. So to close, Mr. Chair, I don't see the need for this bill. I think Vital Records does an incredibly good job. By the way, we work very closely with the city and town clerks in the state who are agents of Vital Records. They collect information at the local level. They issue death certificates. They issue marriage certificates. It's a one-stop shop for them to have Vital Records in the Secretary of State's office, because we also do so much business with them in regards to elections and other things. So instead of inserting a third agency into who they have to communicate with to get state information, we have a very strong, cost-effective, efficient working relationship with the clerks by having these different functions directly in our office and not multiple agencies. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and again, I oppose the amendment.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah, so, thank you. I guess I can't understand why the Secretary of State would oppose looking at something. I can't understand why he would oppose just moving it. But this is not a matter of questioning their ability to manage the privacy and security of the information they hold, which, by the way, is one of the pieces they hold is if a mother has become pregnant through artificial insemination, they're required to report, is the sperm from her husband or for a donor? We are talking about very, very personal information, and systems get hacked. I think it's a question of time. What HIPAA does and what we can't do in the absence of that is bring down the investigatory enforcement and penalty provisions in the federal law. So someone who might have, if there's an unauthorized disclosure, a hacking, a breach, it would set out how that is investigated, which we don't have those federal enforcement powers here in terms of having to move from archives. I think that is an assumption that Vital Records would have to move from archives, which we don't know if that's the case. So I think it's worth looking at. I think there's a reason why no other state has thought it isn't risky to have this data outside of the strong bans that HIPAA provides for protection of very personal medical information. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to respond. Personally, I believe that the Secretary of State's office does a good job with the records they have. I'm faced with an amendment here that really doesn't have a lot of financial implications, that's coming before us today to be put into HB2. Because of my belief that they do such a good job, I probably will vote against this, with the current information that I have, because I don't see the need to do it, and I don't see, that there is even, a reason to go do that investigation, and put that into HB2. So, further comments? Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I met with the Commissioner of Health and Human Services this morning, sort of at your suggestion, Senator Rosenwald, and they are not necessarily opposed to accepting vital records back under the umbrella of the department, but they're not like pushing for it. They do think that there are potential HIPAA issues, but not raising to the concern that this has to happen or has to happen immediately. So I could not vote for this the way it's drafted because this presumes that a change is going to get made. And I think that there has to be a determination, and it really should not be the fiscal committee, but by the full legislature, that it's in the public interest to make this move. So, I mean, we could try to rewrite that, or we could file a bill next year and have that debate. But I can't vote for it in this term. I think that, Dave and Aaron do a really good job as Secretary of State. Sorry for the informality. I think there is cause for concern. I think that I'm not necessarily opposed to a discussion amongst these departments. I absolutely think the town clerks have to be at the table because they're such an important piece of this. And I think that this language presumes that the change should be made and will be made at fiscal. And this hasn't had a public hearing, and I think it absolutely should go through the full process.
Yes, ma'am?
Thank you. So the only thing that fiscal does is accept a report. Fiscal doesn't decide whether we might want to move or not move the department. The last thing I guess I'll say, because I can see where this is going, is that the change to pick up all of the vital record statutes from HHS, move them to vital records, to state, was made before the HIPAA privacy rule was in place. So we've had 20 years now of that, and agencies and organizations that are subject to it understand it. They've all got policies. They know what to do if they suspect there's been a breach. And it's something that is just part of their daily life. I'd be happy to work on different language for this amendment with you, Mr. President, if you are willing to do that with me.
Right now, I, already made my statement. I'm sticking with it. I don't know what two of the other senators here are thinking about on this. Excuse me, if you'd like to say something. Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in. I listened intently as you described the situation going on. I think the key point that I took away from what you said is that, to your knowledge, there have been no issues for the 20 years that it's been here and under the purview of the Secretary's office. While I certainly respect, Senator Rosenwald, what you are attempting to do here, I guess I kind of have to agree with my two colleagues here to the left that if you feel this is a very worthwhile conversation to have, and I know when you and I spoke briefly on it the other day, I think I would encourage you to put a bill in and let the full legislature look at it, rather than push it through in this manner where there isn't a demonstrated sense of urgency to do it right now. Thank you.
Further discussion? Do I have a motion? I didn't hear it if you did. So Senator Rosenwald moves ought to pass. Is there a second? Not seeing a second. Do I have another motion? I will move ITL, or not to adopt the amendment, I guess.
I'll second it.
Okay. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor of not adopting the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is not adopted. The number 4 on the list is Senate Bill 105. Senator Rosenwald, I believe you want to talk on this also? No? Okay. Well, I think it goes back to changing whether or not we fill out the forms and stuff, which goes back to work that you had done. Because this amount, I believe, is the loss of the federal funding by not doing that.
Potential. So I guess I would support this if it had a contingency, so that if Senate Bill 105 did not become law, or there were no loss of federal funds, we would not make this appropriation. Because we don't know what's going to happen with, I mean, maybe you do know. Maybe it's the House loves it and it's going to pass and we can predict what CDC might do.
All right.
I'd be happier with a contingency provision.
Since I don't know what's going on with this bill over in the House, Senator
So
Bradley.
again, when I met with the commissioner and Ms. Tilley this morning, they said that they thought, if I can get everything straight in my mind, that sections 1 and 4 of the bill are going potentially to go forward, but section 2 and 3, which were the sections of the bill that were more controversial in terms of the information collected and what would trigger loss of the funding, were likely to be deleted. Seems like a reasonable compromise to me. I would just suggest we hold on this and see what happens.
So
Yes, ma'am.
I'm thinking that there might be a request for a conference if the House amends the bill. But if sections 2 and 3 are deleted, there will not be a need for this money,
Right.
And that's
So-
a good reason to hold it.
or just say no. Yeah, or contingency.
I can tell you that right now, I don't support this money, okay? I think that we gotta find a way to do what we need to do. If sections 2 and 3, as Senator Bradley says, come out of the bill, I think that we're back in a place where we can agree. But I don't support this money no matter what we do. So whether or not, well,
Because you put it on the amendment list, that's why we're talking about it.
did not put this on
all right, so
The department put this on the recap.
since there is no amendment, a sense of this committee right now,
I make a motion we hold.
all right. Moving on. Thank you, Secretary and Deputy Secretary. Police Standards and Training Council. Which one? It's in the packet. The portal, we just voted on the money for the portal. It was an item number 1,
Okay, sorry about that.
and that was ought to pass.
Okay, sorry. You're right.
Okay. I guess I'm gonna let you talk on this one.
Sure, so I don't see anyone from Police Standards here, but when they came in to do their hearing with us a couple of weeks ago, Senate Bill 130 came up, which is relative to the Court Security Officer Training Program. They'd indicated relative to that bill, they would need 2 part-time training officers, or training specialists rather, to implement such a program. So the cost that you see here on this recap sheet on page 6 is reflective of the salary, the related benefit costs, as well as equipment, office space, and uniforms. And I can tell you Senate Bill 130 has passed both the House and Senate and is on its way to the governor.
All right. Senator D'Alessandro.
I'm pretty familiar with police standards and training. Senator Morse and I worked with standards and training and brought them from the penalty assessment program to totally general funds, which I think was the right thing to do at the right time. It seems to me, relative to what's going on in the world today, Court Security Officer Training Program is essential. And what they do is done well, and it's done across the board to every law enforcement agency in the state. These are the local police, the state police, and everybody else in law enforcement. The salaries and the benefits. Now, do we know what level they are, Vicki?
I do have a breakdown. I think there were labor grade 25 part-time positions, no more than 29 and a half hours per week.
Okay. I think it's incumbent upon us to provide the training that's required. Look at what's happening. Look at what's happening around the country. When people are ill-prepared, I will comment to you that there was a press conference held last evening or the evening before in conjunction with the atrocities that took place in Texas. And let me say, that was the most abhorrent press conference I've ever seen in my life. Nobody knew anything about anything. Police officer, chief of the fire department, congressman, mayor, and so forth. Nobody knew anything about anything that happened. That's ridiculous. That's terribly disconcerting. We've never run into a situation like this in this state. I called the Commissioner of Safety and I said, if that situation ever happened in New Hampshire, I would recommend that everybody be fired. I thought it was the most unbelievable situation I had ever seen. And if the public is to have any confidence in law enforcement and the kind of protections they're getting, those completely disappeared. And that was on national television. National television. If Skipper thinks he needs this, I think I would move that we grant it.
Further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when Senate Bill 130 came through the committee, there was definitely very strong support for it, and I'm glad to see that the House has pushed this forward as well. We didn't have the numbers at the time of what the anticipated personnel levels are going to be, so I think it's a very important program, and I would certainly also support it. So I guess if Senator D'Alessandro's made a motion, I'll second it. How's that?
Senator Bradley.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. Is this designed to be a 2-year initiative for training, that these would be temporary positions, or is this designed to be ongoing? Do we know?
So I guess what I would say is it would probably be ongoing in the sense that new hirees would have to be trained as they cycle through. We worked with the Sheriff's Association to get language that they were acceptable with when this was in committee. So I would anticipate that it's probably going to be ongoing, but I guess I don't have a definite answer on that, because I do know that they have regular turnover within the court security division, because they are part-time. And many of them are retired officers or retired people from other professions that serve in that capacity.
Senator Rosenwald.
When I met with Director Skippa, and we talked about the training specialists, I think he told me that he would not need to have them forever.
Okay.
That would be like, get some people trained and then train the trainers, or the trainers train other people. So the security officer, I don't know about, but my memory is that he wasn't looking at needing this extra money for training forever. I could be wrong, but that's my memory.
Yeah.
Diane Martin, Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts. I can clarify that for you because we've been working really closely with Director Skippa on this initiative. I do believe that it would be an ongoing expense. The intent is to hire trainers who will focus on this work part-time and train all of our court security officers on an ongoing basis. So initial training and the annual training.
Senator Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur. I can't see how it could be an ongoing situation. It's something that really has to be in place in an ongoing situation.
We actually met with Director Skippa the other day to try to work through some of this. And I mentioned the number of officers that we have just in court security is about 150. And he said that's the third largest force of security. We don't call ourselves law enforcement, but, and so I think the training is really essential.
Senator Bradley.
More question for the LBA. Could this be moved into 23? Not lapse until,
Yeah, we could draft a House Bill 2 appropriation to have it hit fiscal 23 general funds and have it be non-lapsing for the biennium if that's what the committee chose to do.
so, for a friendly amendment to the amendment that's already on the floor, that we instruct the LBA to move it into fiscal 23 with a
Well, they would
non-lapsing language.
They would need to write the amendment, but the committee amendment would be to authorize these funds, $350K, funded in 23 with non-lapsing to cover both 24 and 25.
Yes.
Does everyone understand what the committee amendment would be? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. And the committee amendment will be drafted. I looked in the police standards training handout that we got, and I saw no mention of it in there, so just. Office of the Child Advocate.
I can take that one for you, Senator.
All right.
Doesn't look like she's here. So the Office of the Child Advocate, they had 3 requests. The first request was to fund a new public relations representative, trainee and officer. That would be a cost at $74,567 for 24 and $78,000 for fiscal year 25. And this new position is in charge of outreach, education, information, and referral services.
Discussion.
Could this also be moved forward with funds not lapsing until the end of the next biennium?
We can draft an amendment to do that as well.
Senator Bradley.
Was this in either the House or the governor's?
This was in the House, and the House chose not to fund it.
So it was requested by the governor, but not funded by the House?
Correct. It was a prioritized additional request. The governor didn't fund it, the House didn't fund it. I'm sorry.
Neither funded?
Neither funded it.
Any additional discussion?
I think we should hold on this. I want a little bit more information.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
With the desire to hold, is that it on everything on the sheet?
I would
All
say
the way
that's
down?
1, 2, and 3. I don't know
Yeah, I
whether we,
think 4 and 5, I mean, that's just
Well, 4 is easy.
moving, the funding, as I understand it, my amendment.
so as far as I know, it's 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so we'll be
We're
voting,
holding on.
we'll be voting on 4 and 5.
Well, we're gonna be discussing it and hopefully voting on it. Amen. So moving on to 4.
So 4 was additional funds for a case management enhancement system that the House put into. The governor didn't allocate funds, but the House did allocate the funds. Senator Bradley requested that we delete those from HB1 and move those to HB2 as an amendment, which would move the funds from fiscal year 24 and 25 and move them to fiscal year 23 with a non-lapsing appropriation.
Additional discussion? All those,
Just a question, so we would be accepting the negative on 4 and the approval on 5? Yes,
Non-lapsing.
right.
okay. Amendments 1668. It's in your packet. Next page. Right there. Oh. The amendment should be right after that sheet, Senator Alessandro. Senator Bradley.
So you made it non-lapsing forever. And I was just wondering if,
Good pickup, Mike.
well, I mean, it says such funds shall be non-lapsing
It should be for the
for the
budget
biennium.
of 24, 25.
Could we have a committee amendment?
We sure can. I
To
can make
say-
that correction.
Yeah.
The funds shall not lapse until, because they might not use it all.
Right.
Thank you.
I have no problem with that.
Further discussion? All right, so we're taking up 4 and 5. We've got the amendment 1668 in your packet. Senator Bradley moves, Senator D'Alessandro seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, the ayes have it. Moving on. Judicial branch. We have 736,000.
We do. Judicial branch came in and presented and did not make any additional requests. This issue on section 372 of House Bill 2 came up recently. The House added a section that appropriated $1 million to the Department of Safety for sharing of bail data with law enforcement. The other piece that was missing from that is the costs for the judicial branch to implement their end. So they met with, the two agencies met, provided more detail, and came up with a revised estimate for safety of $750,000 and a cost to the judicial branch of $980,000. $1,286 for a net of $736. This is also FY '23 funds as drafted. I got an amendment within the last few minutes, if you'd like me to pass it out.
If you would, please. Right. Thank you. Good with it?
So I would ask the question again, are these funds that should be non-lapsing forever or just till the end of the next biennium?
Additional comments?
As sort of a practice, when we have this stuff drafted with OLS using the '23 appropriations, we add the non-lapsing because if it's appropriated June 30th and we don't have that language, can't use the money. So we typically add that. These amounts are based on some pretty good work that both agencies went through to get there. So if anything does lapse, it won't be much.
Okay, so I think we should put this one on hold. Give everybody a chance at least to look at it, Senator Bradley.
Yeah, so I'm not convinced at all about section 372, and I think, you know, we may well want to take section 372 out of HB2. I think until we have a little bit more clarity as to what the House may be willing to do in terms of Senator Soucy's bail bill that we voted, I think, 21-3 for, I just don't see why we would be doing something different that I'm not sure gets us where we want to go. So rather than make an amendment right now to delete section 372 and delete this funding, I would say we put it on hold.
Additional comments? Okay, Department of Justice.
Department of Justice made a request to convert a full-time temporary attorney position to a full-time permanent position. This is an attorney that provides legal services to the Public Utilities Commission, and there would be no fiscal impact.
Further comments? I have a motion about to pass, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. Further comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on.
Item number 2 and item number 6 are amendments proposed by Senator Rosenwald to establish a cyber prosecution unit within the Department of Justice.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. So if you recall, when the Attorney General was here, we asked him whether they had resources that could enforce consumer privacy and security over there, and they really don't. So these two amendments, House Bill 1 and 2, go together. the House Bill 1 portion is 3 positions, an attorney, an investigator, and a paralegal to do that work. The House Bill 2 amendment, which is 1361S, does a couple of things. One, it gives the Consumer Protection Division the responsibility to do that work, which is currently not there. But the second thing it does is lift the amount of settlement funds starting in the second year. This is only all takes place halfway through the biennium, to keep an extra $1 million from the settlement funds. We have been bringing, why are you all looking at each other?
I'm just trying to get a sense.
Okay, I haven't finished explaining it yet.
And
So we've been bringing in more than $5 million a year in settlements. This Consumer Protection Division is self-funded by being allowed to keep $5 million a year. They have a financial fraud division, which is going to run out of money. It's going to run out of funding at the end of next year. This second year start to allow them to keep an extra $1 million out of escrow would allow them to continue both the financial fraud work and also have a cybersecurity division, which would take them a while to recruit, to find an attorney who's experienced in cybercrime. I have worked on this language with the Department of Justice, and there's really not a cost to it because we bring in more than $5 million a year in settlements. So it will allow us to continue financial fraud and start doing cyber crime investigation and enforcement. Thank you.
well, the cost would be to the general fund, that the general fund would not be getting the amount of money that would be reduced by $1 million.
Yes, but it's not predictable.
But even if the fund, because the way it's worded, it can't exceed 6 million, so if at the beginning of the year I spend down to the 6, and later I get more funds, but I've spent funds, so then, it certainly could be much more than the $1 million over the year. That might not end up in the general funds that it could.
Well, it would set a cap of 6 million
Right.
a year
So if
that the department would keep.
if on July the 1st, I have 6 million, okay, and I spend 2 million in August, get a settlement, I'm back up to 6 million again, spend 2 million in October, get another settlement, I'm back up to 6 million. So each time I went back up to 6 million, I would have only gone up to 5 million with the old bill. So it could be, again, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, I
The
don't.
way I read it, that's what I'm explaining, I think is correct.
I don't think that's what happens now. It's right now they can keep 5 million per fiscal year. This would allow them starting in the second year. The
Consumer
only
Pro-
thing that changes is the 5 goes to 6, starting July 1st, 24. It doesn't change anything else about the current law.
So line 12 in the middle says the consumer protection escrow account shall at no time exceed current law 5 million, the change would be 6 million, with any amount in excess of the 5 million or 6 million deposited into the general fund. So there's going to be money coming in and going out. So every time money comes into that fund, if the fund is not at 5 million before or 6 million after, then that money would be retained. And if money comes into the fund more than once a year, then again,
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Senator Rosenblum, what is the purpose of adding the extra $1 million? Because I'm reading it the same way that Senator Gray is that this is an ongoing expenditure and, you know, in and out fund. So what's the purpose of raising the cap?
The purpose is to be able to continue funding the financial fraud unit, which has been paid for with a mortgage settlement, national mortgage settlement. Those funds, the Attorney General told us were going to run out at the end of next year, and to allow them to have a cybersecurity division, which we don't currently have.
And the estimated cost is $415,000 a year?
Between those two units, it would be in the 900s.
Okay, because the appropriation out of HB 1 was in fiscal 25.
That's for the cybersecurity
Okay.
unit. They have a financial fraud unit, but it is going to run out of money. And they don't really have a funding source.
So the current cap of 5 million wouldn't be able to provide that $900,000 when they needed it for the year?
Correct.
Even though they can replenish that back to $5 million on every settlement basis?
It just.
All right, I don't know that we're getting anywhere on this one, so we're gonna hold it.
Okay.
And we'll get an interpretation of what the bill says, how the money would go around, and the 931,000, et cetera, in there. So both 2 and 6 are on hold. All right, our next one, 3. All right. Well, let's let LBA at least give us an intro.
Number 3 on your sheet is an amendment to increase the appropriation for the Child Advocacy Centers by $1.6 million in each fiscal year, 24 and 25.
What's the appropriation for them now?
Senator Rosenwald.
I'm sorry.
She was waiting, so.
I'm sorry.
Yes, so the appropriation now is like 100,000 a year. It's been funded at that. I do have some information on the child advocacy centers. As you know, the number of DCYF investigations has been rising, and the cases have become more acute. So that's leading to fewer of them being closed. They've, since 2018, the child advocacy centers have experienced a 243% increase in their workload. These are really amazing places. If you have not been to visit one, I hope you will. But when a child is abused or either physically or sexually, these are places where all of the interviewing can be done at one time by a trained interviewer in a non-traumatic way. And all the lawyers and police can be watching from behind a one-way mirror. They're located around the state, but they have had very, very little state funding. And they're becoming more and more strained. This is the amount of money they had asked for, which would allow them to decrease their caseloads and also purchase some forensic equipment and their software licensing. So I put it out there for the committee to discuss this request.
Senator Bradley.
No, I just want to know what the appropriation is now. It's $100K.
Per year.
Yeah, I mean, I think somewhere in between the two proposals, 3 and 4, makes sense, but a 16-fold increase, I think, is asking quite a bit.
I'm sure we'll get to a
Well,
place.
what was the governor's budget, the House budget, and all of a sudden here in the beginning of May, we're getting a request for $3,200,000.
I think this was the request made during the governor's phase, was not funded either there or in the House.
So what are they gonna spend the money on?
Well,
It's 11 times higher.
their staff costs are going up too. They're struggling to retain their workforce, like everybody else. They have,
Well, the original request that came to me,
was,
and not through there, but, was to double their previous from 100,000 to 200,000. Certainly maintaining staff, would seem like if they're doing it with the other money, that a twofold increase,
I don't,
Senator Pearl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think if it's okay with your permission, we 3 and 4 are trying to do the same thing, so can maybe we talk about them at the same time? Is that okay?
Yeah,
So my ask in number 4 was simply to provide them some more funding because, their inflation costs are hitting all of us, higher electricity rates and things of that nature. And that was the ask that was made of me by Senator Lang, actually, and I told him I would come in and ask for that, but I became aware afterwards that they have additional needs, but I'm not certain that we can necessarily justify going quite that high, but I think we definitely need to look at giving them some type of an increase, because they certainly are experiencing all of the things that Senator Rosenwald was talking about, employee retention as well as increased cost.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me, what was the initial ask, Mike?
The governor's budget had $100,000 a year, and the House did not increase
So
that.
The House
And
level funded
I
it?
don't believe there was a request made in the House Division I committee, not by the department.
Okay. And line item 4 would double that, right?
increase of
what was-
50%.
Or it would go from 100,000 up to 150.
150,000.
But did those who were advocating at the time, Senator Pearl, you could maybe help me with this one, did they enunciate on the difficulties of getting people, retaining people, the scope of work that's being done at the present time? For example, we had a situation in Manchester that's gone on for years with a small child. And there were tries to resolve this, you know, repeatedly. Different agencies tried to resolve it, trying to find them, and some, the police were overseen by others. That's gone on for years. I mean, you could have exhausted 50,000, 100,000 on that case in just a matter of time. The question is, how many cases like that exist? How important is it for us to bring forward the mechanism for people to deal with these problems? And to be advocates for children. I mean, that's the question. And, you know, I don't know if the 1.6 is enough, or maybe it's too much, but I do know that the number of cases that are appearing throughout our state seem to be growing dramatically.
Thank you, Senator. So the original request, again, that came through Senator Lang was just dealing with increases in operating expenses that they were having. It had nothing to do with personnel or other things of that nature. Since then, I've learned that there may be a need for a bit more additional money. As a lot of some of the counties, they fund this particular program through their county budget, and others do it through fundraising. And we all know that the difficulty that some of those efforts are falling on right now with the increase in inflation. It's making less money available. So my feeling is we need to find a spot somewhere in there, and I don't know how you all want to look at this. Does somebody want to pick a number?
Okay, I'll pick a number. FY '23 funds, $200,000, and 3 and 4 get combined.
What was that?
Put into FY '23, $200,000,
Extra?
and the others, all the other numbers go away.
Well, don't they currently
we're-
get 100,000 a year?
We're doubling, well, yeah, but it would be available to them. But since we're gonna fund it out of FY '23,
So instead of funding the $200,000 they're currently getting, you're saying we'd fund
they'd
400?
still get the 100,000 that they're
Okay.
getting right now.
In addition to that, we put
In
200,000.
addition to that, we would give them 200,000, supposedly, you know, 100,000 per year. Okay, but it would be '23 money, so, but that would double what they're getting.
With
2 times.
respect, I don't think that's enough. Their caseload is up. These kids are more damaged. And just don't think that's enough.
I'll move $100,000 per year, or $200,000 in FY '23.
I'll second it. Further discussion?
We're going with the House Bill 1 amendment, Senator. You're putting in $200,000 in '23 money?
Over and above what they already are funded, so
In
we
the
double their funding.
Okay. So that means that you'll go 200,000 of FY '23 money and.
The rest of the numbers in 3 and 4 get taken out.
So both number 3 and 4 would go away. So we'd make it from 200,000 they're currently receiving to 400,000, essentially doubling their funding.
I don't know. Okay.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. 5.
Number 5 is an amendment from Senator Rosenwolf to House Bill 1 that would increase the appropriation to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force by $400,000 in '04, $400,000 in '05. And there are 2 other rows on this sheet that have to do with that, Internet Crimes Against Children. And those are row number 8, which is the bill that's tabled in the Senate, Senate Bill 232. And then row number 10, which is an amendment from Senator Bradley that would fund the same amount of money but use FY23 funds again.
We don't even understand that.
That's Amendment 1595.
Oh. So the Senator Bradley's amendment funds it at the same level as what I'm proposing, but moves it into surplus?
Yep.
And is it non-lapsing forever or non-lapsing for,
It should be
For
page
biennium.
15 in your book.
love it?
This one is non-lapsing until June 30th, 2025.
So it goes away then.
If they haven't spent it.
Okay.
What is the current appropriation for internet crimes? I think it's 250.
$250 per year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Pearl?
This was an ask by them from their presentation, right, to go to 400, if I remember correctly?
I'm not sure if the Department of Justice asked for it, but it was in Senate Bill 232.
That's where I remember it
Yep.
from. Okay, thank you. I knew I had seen this number before, I was trying to remember where it was. Thank you.
It's a bill we have on the table.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Okay, so in essence, we're voting on line item 10, which is the Amendment 1595S. Further discussion? I guess we have a motion by Senator Bradley, seconded by Senator Pearl for that amendment. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. And we're on to number 7. Amendment 1663.
It's an amendment from Senator D'Alessandro and me that I would like to move and discuss.
I'll second it.
What's
Thank you.
the amendment?
So this is 1663S, and it starts on page 12. After Judge Broderick came to the fiscal committee and presented his report, he offered to meet with anyone. And so the dean and I met with him, and he had, it was very interesting. I mean, there are 1,200 cases that have been filed in the courts. About 50 cases have come forward to the fund. He told us all but a handful of them are not from those 1,200 already filed cases. And he believes that unless we make a couple of changes to the operation of the fund, not including adding more money to it, that more of those cases will not come into the fund. And we will be facing trials for years to come, which he said would overwhelm the court system, and presumably they would overwhelm the Department of Justice and the state budget. He recommended that we not make people waive their right to sue when they get an offer from the Attorney General, but move it back to after they've heard what the administrator might offer them. And he also suggested that there are going to be some, he thinks, small number of cases that are so egregious we would want to avoid going to trial. So he suggested that we give the Attorney General and the administrator discretion to raise the cap for cases that are just so horrible that we wouldn't want a trial. And so it is drafted subject to RSA 1435B, which is on line 29. This is current law that gives the Attorney General the ability to settle cases up to 1/4% of previous year general fund revenues without having to come before the legislature. This amendment does, he also suggested that people who've been incarcerated, when they see the word investigator, they run in the opposite direction. And so he thinks we should change that name to fact facilitator, because he just believes that investigator is not a term that somebody has been involved with the criminal justice system is going to come forward on. The final thing this amendment does is allow emotional abuse cases to come into the fund.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Rosenwell has very clearly articulated the meeting that we had with the administrator, Judge Broderick. The items contained in the amendment give the administrator the opportunity to work with those who are claimants, and gives him some flexibility in terms of dealing with them. The thought process was that more people would come to this process if indeed these items were in the discovery process. I think it was clear that there are cases that will have to go to trial. All right, they will have to. He also talked about the statute of limitations. Now, we thought that these were very reasonable requests, and if anything, they enhanced the process and allowed the process to move forward. He believed that without these little tweaks, we wouldn't get much in terms of advancement on these cases, because at the present time, I think only one case has been settled. And indeed, time goes on. There's a statute of limitations that comes into play, and his perception was, given these abilities, he would be able to move cases more quickly.
Senator Bradley.
Right, which is the game, and he felt it was very good for both parties.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much. So I also spoke with the Attorney General late last week about this amendment, and appreciate that I saw it a few days ago, so I could speak with the Attorney General. I think Section 1, no problem, and I could support Section 1. Section 2, I think this opens the legislation, House Bill 1677, up way beyond the scope of what We thought originally when Representative Umberger filed the legislation, I think it's way too early to make this kind of a big change, and this is a big change. And the Attorney General told me he is not in favor of that. Section 3. My recollection, and Representative Umberger can maybe answer this question, but when we considered this bill in 2022, my understanding is that the cap that applies more or less in state law that you just outlined is about $4.75 million that the Attorney General could go up to that point if the cap were waived. And I appreciate the fact that the Attorney General would have to sign off on it. But again, I think it's way too early to make that kind of a change. I think we've, put $100 million into the rainy day fund. Whether that is sufficient to handle the claims that are going to come forward, I don't think any of us know, but I think doing this right now until we have more real world data about how the settlement process is working is way premature. And so I'd be opposed to that. Section 4, I think may have some merit. I talked to the Attorney General about that. Obviously, fact facilitator is throughout, and he didn't have a problem with moving the time that you would have to adjudicate in section 4 and 5. So I could support section 1, 4, and 5, but not 2 and 3.
I think the fact of the matter is that we'd like to present something that enhances the ability to solve these cases. And your support of the sections, discussion with the Attorney General, I think is admirable, because you can't do it without the Attorney General, right? The whole thing, he has final decision on everything here. And
while I appreciate that, I want to make sure that we have a budget in this budget cycle and future budget cycles that doesn't get beyond our ability to control it. And I think that while this may have some merit in egregious cases, I think it's way too early to make this kind of huge change to House Bill 1677.
I respect that. I think it's quite clear, though, that some changes are required. Based on what's happened to this point in time, some changes are required. Maybe they're the minor changes that you can support in the bill.
And I think I indicated a willingness to go along with sections 1, 4, and 5 in this amendment, but not 2 and 3.
Right, I understand. But I think that's progress.
So if you join me in sponsoring that amendment to this amendment, it would be bipartisan and we could move on.
All right, we're gonna put this on hold, hoping that the two senators will be able to get together and come up with some common language. Senator Rosenwald, you had your hand up.
I did. In terms of it being way too early, I think this fund closes on December 31st, 2024. So there are currently like 20 months left. By the time we could do legislation next year, we're talking about 6 months. So, maybe 1435B is too high, but in terms of trying to bring cases in, I respectfully disagree that it's way too early. I think we want people to come into the fund because, well, for lots of reasons, both financial, trauma, awfulness, but I don't see it as way too early in terms of what we could do next year.
Thumberger.
Yes, I just want to remind people that legislation or changes to the criteria only goes to the fiscal committee. it does not go through the legislature. So I would suggest that you work something out and go to the next fiscal committee with whatever changes you can agree on, and not put this into HB2. So that's what I wanted to say. These things can be done directly through the fiscal committee. And we set it up that way because we didn't want to get into these arguments with the full legislature. So that's where that is.
And thank you for reminding me about that. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, no problem.
And Del Sandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm perfectly willing, I know Senator Rosenwald, I'm not speaking for him, but her willingness to solve problems has always been preemptive in my mind and ready to go. So I'm happy to work with you, Senator Bradley. It's a great suggestion, and we'll follow through. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
so
Chairman.
we're still gonna put this one on hold here in case there's any actions that we need to take. Since both of you are on fiscal committee, I'm sure it'll go very smoothly. And moving right on to number 9.
Number 9 is a request from the Attorney General, John Formella, to establish a healthcare consumer protection trust fund. The department deals with a lot of healthcare mergers and those types of transactions. And this would be a mechanism to use some settlement money to set up a fund to help cover some of those costs. It also establishes a consumer protection healthcare consumer protection advisory commission. I've asked for this to be drafted. Don't have that amendment yet, but I have the language that Mr. Formella provided if you're interested in looking at that.
Do you have copies for, yeah, if you. Okay, so we do have copies of it already. Okay. I mean, I personally don't have any problem with establishing a fund that's paid out of settlement money to do this, so. Senator Rosenwald, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you. We just had a long conversation about settlement money.
Yeah.
And so that, if we're gonna fund more things out of the same $5 million, we're not gonna be able to do financial fraud or cybercrime.
And I think that we have that other one on hold, so you will certainly, I'm sure, if we did something with this one today, you would certainly remind me of that, but I would tend to put the whole thing on hold and we can discuss it all as one package later. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
So it is on hold. And the next one, we have the Human Rights Commission.
The Human Rights Commission appears on page 16 of this handout. And there's a list of 7 items that were requested. The first 5 of those were requested from the House. None of them were granted. 6 and 7 relate to the commission moving to new office space and their anticipated costs to do that.
Comments? Senator Bradley?
So I don't necessarily have a problem with 6 or 7. My understanding is that the plan for that new office space is cubicles. Obviously, there has to be privacy for the Human Rights Commission to be able to hear it. So I think that probably is okay. I'm, not as well versed maybe as I should be on the rest of it, but you know, the fact that the governor didn't fund it and the fact that the House didn't fund it, I would think that we could hold on that.
Okay, the $300,000 in 6, it's a one-time expense. We've been moving some of those into 23. Any objection?
I just, if I might, Mr. Chair, I suggested that this person contact Admin Services about space. You know, we do have unused state space that she might be able to, this entity might be able to occupy. And I think her needs were pretty specifically addressed in terms of what the privacy issue, et cetera. But you know, we're buying a building for the Department of Education. In our capital budget, we're paying $7 million for that building, and they're renovating a building that won't have anybody in it. Landrigan Hall will have nobody in it. And how much have we spent renovating that building? So I mean, I think the idea expressed by the former legislator Leon Callowell was to renovate space that the state owned and make it available for state agencies. And we have many state agencies that took advantage of that once these buildings were reconstructed. But we do have a lot of vacant space, and it would be my intention to make sure that we use the vacant space before we buy more space. So when we buy more space, we've got to maintain it. Thank you.
Certainly, the way I understood it in the capital committee is that the space that we are have vacated, I should say, for the Department of Education would then be refurbished, and other entities that were over in that park or others would be placed into that so that we could renovate their spaces. Also, some of them are in very great need of that. So whether this money here probably should go to the Department of Administrative Services because they are the ones that should control the space. Senator Bradley, looked like you had a comment.
I mean, we could have the LBA contact Commissioner Erlinghausen and ask about this if we want to hold on it.
Okay. And
But I do think it could go into 23 no matter what.
So on 6 and 7, we're going to request from Administrative Services what their opinion of this is and anticipate moving it into the 23 money. And right now, take no action on 1 through 5. Okay, on taking no action on 1 through 5, I'd like to get a sense of the committee. All those in favor of taking no action, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay. Department of Energy. LBA, you can intro.
Yes, we have several items here for the Department of Energy, and I'm happy to see the commissioners here because he'll be able to explain them much better than I can.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Jared Chicoine. I'm the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy, and joining me today is Lenny Raudio, our Business Office Director. I'd like to just start with number 1. Lenny can explain further, but essentially the two funds in item 1 and 2, the Renewable Energy Fund and the RGGI Fund, they're essentially they're continually appropriated non-lapsing funds with very clear statutory missions. Their inclusion in the budget, it sort of unnecessarily increases our agency budget while the revenues and expenditures are less discretionary. So it really does increase our budget without, it's not funding that we're directed by statute as to how we're supposed to spend those funds. And they're obviously non-generally funded. The Renewable Energy Fund is funded through alternative compliance payments by the utilities to meet their renewable portfolio standard commitments. And RGGI, of course, is a cap and trade regional agreement that we're a part of. And those funds are everything above the first dollar of the allowance that is purchased goes to programs, is rebated to ratepayers directly, and that happens on a quarterly basis. So we just wanted to present that as an option, and it would be helpful to us.
All right, so I think you've spoken both on 1 and 2. Or
I'm
do you
sorry.
have any-
Yeah, I have. I
anything-
apologize.
No, that's fine. We just have to keep score. That's
Okay.
fine. All right, comments on 1 and 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is, because these funds are continually appropriated, because they're legislatively authorized, they do not need to be accounted for in the budget.
Correct.
And they will continue to be appropriated as has always been the case in the past. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just so you know, we're required to submit a report annually to the relevant policy committee in the House and the Senate on both programs. So that would be Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee.
And it's important to note that they're both on the dedicated funds list, so they're reported on annually by the Department of Administrative Services.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Question, when you want to draw on these funds, do you need to come to the fiscal committee, or do you just call up administrative services and say, send us some money? I'm just wondering, in between your annual reports, how is there transparency for the public?
Yes, so we send a memo to, well, we record the revenue once we receive it, and then we send a memo to the budget office at DAS, and they approve the appropriation of the funds, and then the Bureau of Accounts in the Comptroller's office will actually create the warrant for the appropriation. And then it's reported annually in the dedicated funds report. It's a pretty robust report that we do every year that goes to admin services on all our dedicated funds, which these are 2 of. And that's also sent to the Senate President, Speaker of the House, and other committees.
And Senator, I would just add that the grant funding through these programs, the way that is allocated, or I should say distributed, is typically through a request for proposals in the various programs, which are public, of course, so that the public is able to see those RFPs and ultimately know where those awards are being made. And anyone that we contract with, anyone who receives those grant funds, those contracts go to the Governor and Executive Council.
Senator?
So I know that you were budgeting $2 million here in the Renewable Energy Fund, but in fact, in most years, you have been spending over 3. But what we hear from members of the public is that the department is underspending what they could spend in the Renewable Energy Fund. How can we increase the public's confidence by greater transparency? Are there suggestions you can make to us, maybe through footnotes or something, if we take these funds off budget, which I think there are probably good reasons to do? How do we increase public confidence?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We've received feedback from stakeholders since the creation of the department that they would like us to take a look at the programs that are currently available and to hold stakeholder sessions, public hearings, to take feedback on what may be other opportunities for this funding. And that would require a legislative process to change certain parts of that. But we do plan on going to the public to solicit feedback on how these programs should change. And we do plan on doing that in the next biennium.
But you need legislation.
Well, the purpose of those public hearings would be, if legislation is required to make some changes, that we would absolutely approach legislators who might be willing to introduce a bill to make changes. But we're committed to that. Again, we've heard from stakeholders over the course of the last couple of years that they would like us to take a look, and we would do that through a public process.
I'm just confused, Mr. Chairman. Do you need legislation to hold a public hearing?
No, we do not. No, we would take
Oh.
that up on our own. If the question is around transparency of these programs, that's what I'm saying, is that we absolutely plan on doing public hearings to receive feedback from the public and stakeholders on these programs, and should changes be made. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay, further comments? Motion to move these out of the budget?
I move that.
Okay, Senator Bradley moves to take these out of the budget, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. Further discussion, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We're finished with 1 and 2, moving on to 3.
3 and 4 both deal with, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, either one,
Well, 3 and 4 are both are related to
Yep.
positions, so if I could address both of those, I would appreciate that. So one of the benefits of creating the department during the last budget was the ability to find greater administrative efficiencies in our budget. And when we presented our proposed operating budget to the governor last fall, we had proposed abolishing 7 positions. So we took that role seriously of finding efficiencies, and I want a department that provides value to ratepayers. They fund our organization, and we want to be as efficient and lean as we can be while still providing exceptional service to the ratepayers of New Hampshire. So we had come in, we had requested the abolishment of 7 positions. Over the course of this legislative session, there have been several bills proposed that look like they're on track to pass that would essentially assign new responsibilities to the department on important issues such as community power aggregation, which is in the news quite a bit right now. There's a House Bill 385, that passed the House. It's on its way to the Senate, that requires the department to handle complaints related to community power. And, that it's a new program. Municipalities can now become energy aggregators. And the process laid out in HB 385 would require additional staff resources for us to provide service to ratepayers that have complaints that need to be resolved around that program. Again, we believe community power, it's an exciting new development. It really could benefit ratepayers. And we want to make sure that we're providing exceptional service on the consumer side to those who are affected. So we would like we need additional positions to assist with that. So I'll just look at item 3. That's an attorney. That attorney position would help with our consumer service division as they work through these complaints. There's also another piece of legislation that, or I should say there's a discussion of an amendment to current legislation that would make some changes to the site evaluation committee in that process. And as part of that amendment, we would be given some of the enforcement and we would be given the enforcement and compliance responsibilities as it relates to projects that have been issued a certificate by the SEC. So we would need those additional legal resources in the agency to make sure that we're providing those services to those affected by those projects. So they'd be assisting us with the consumer complaints as well as any new SEC responsibilities given to the department. There are a total of 4 positions. The other 2 would be analytical, and they would help both on the regulatory side, consumer complaints, and in the SEC process. We believe that these 4 positions that we had submitted to be abolished will help us provide real value to ratepayers. Again, we're not trying to build the department. I think our budget proposal originally proves that, and but we also want to make sure that we're providing New Hampshire ratepayers, again, with the best customer service we can and assistance. So we believe these positions add value.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much. I am supportive of both positions. I think that with community power, there has to be oversight to it. Community power offers for, in particular, residential customers who have not, for whatever reason, and quite frankly, just because it's complicated, there are not enough good deals out there, because aggregation hasn't happened as well as some people would have liked it to have happened, have not been able to partake in a competitive market for provision of electric service. I think now more than ever, for residential folks, community power does offer an alternative. And obviously, if it's going to work, there has to be some oversight. So I am in full support of that. The second piece, the oversight of any changes that might be made to the site evaluation committee process. Site evaluation committee has been, it's just been a very cumbersome process. The amendment that's going to be heard tomorrow is a very slimmed down version of the bill that the House considered and then I believe retained. And really, it would not make major changes to who is on the site evaluation committee. It would make changes to the oversight, the enforcement of any criteria that the site evaluation committee recommends. So it's a much more discrete version of that bill, but nevertheless, important step forward. If we are going to have opportunities for new sources of energy in New Hampshire, whether it's renewable, whether it's traditional, we're going to have to understand that we can't just say no to every application that comes forward. And when we say yes, there has to be that regulatory oversight. And I think the Department of Energy is in a good position to do that. It's my hope this amendment will be taken up. I think there's bipartisan support in the Senate for it. Senator Avard and Waters are, my understanding is they're both sponsoring it together. So I think that given the importance of energy, these positions are warranted. So I will stop there.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Are these positions going to be needed even if those bills that you're talking about don't come forward? I guess what I'm wondering is, would it be more prudent to have a contingency provision that if the legislation didn't go forward, we would not restore these positions?
I was looking for the department to answer that first. I don't know.
Well, I think that's, seems like a legislative process question to me. We, again, we came in and requested that these positions be abolished originally. You know, if there is some sort of provision, that's
so
really.
Your answer is no, that they wouldn't be needed unless the legislation went forward.
I think for community power, they would be necessary, absolutely.
And
yes,
I have signed up for community power.
Yes, and
because Nash was in it.
we absolutely would need that position. Again, community power, I believe that bill, you know, my job is not to speculate on whether this body passes that bill, but, you know, with everything that's going on there, that would be crucial to the administration of those responsibilities.
And that's number 3.
That's number 3. I think if you, I mean, we could put a we could either put a contingency on, or we could put a contingency on later as a last minute amendment, depending on what happens with, I think I can't even remember, Senate Bill, House
think
Bill 281, I think, is the bill.
Would it be acceptable, we would make the commitment to not fill a position if, I'm just throwing that out.
With that, I'm happy to go forward.
I guess I would be happiest with a motion on 3. Ought to
Second.
pass with a second. Okay, so it was made by Senator Pearl, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. Further discussion on 3? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, 3 passes. And 4, if we've got those bills hanging out, we've got others that are hanging out. And if they're, do we want to put it on hold, or do we want to try to?
I don't have a problem with doing it now, because if those bills don't go anywhere, he just said he's not gonna fund them, fill them, I mean, so, or we could put it on hold, it doesn't really matter. I'm trying to make your life easier, Senator Gray,
Hey,
with everything on
You know,
hold.
we'll get there no matter what. So what is the sense of the committee? Do you want to act on this, or do you want to put it on hold?
I would say we act on it with the contingency language.
Okay, so LBA. We're going to get a motion that move it ought to pass with a contingency that when House Bill, or they're House bills, aren't
I
they?
think it's House Bill 281.
Yes.
The
House Bill
Arts
281.
Committee is having a hearing on,
Correct.
right here tomorrow morning.
That's correct, yes.
I'm sure you'll be back.
Yes.
Is that the only bill that this position is going to affect?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yes, yes, number 3, yes, the attorney position.
So we're on number 4 now.
Oh, I'm sorry, number 4. Yes, so number 4 would provide the analyst position to work on SEC issues as well as, or there's 2 analyst positions there to work on SEC and consumer, and then a support position as well.
And the only bill that we have hanging out there that will require those services is just 281 with the amended version?
It would be also House Bill 385 and this bill, House Bill 281 for tomorrow.
Okay.
And I know I mentioned Senate Bill 54, that's the
Are you good
procurement
with the
bill.
amendment? Understand it?
I understand, but not to ask a silly question, what if one passes and the other doesn't?
That was where I was going.
Okay.
That's where I was heading for.
I do agree.
We're,
Go ahead.
the chair is gonna put this one on hold. Not worry about it. Okay, now we have the lapse. We're taking the money out, so.
So we believe that number is very close, that's an accurate number.
So what do you need for a motion on this?
This one is gonna be a sense of committee just
Okay.
to remove it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. And we're on to liquor.
The Liquor Commission, on page 18 of your handout, had a very small request to increase overtime benefits for in their drug task force account. And that's $20,000 in FY '24.
And we might as well take up the other one too.
Number 2 is an amendment to remove the handheld PCs from the operating budget and move the total amount into House Bill 2 as a FY 2023 appropriation.
We can move on to pass on both, I think, because It's all one bill when we get all done, so.
I'll be glad to pass on one or two.
So Senator Pearl, Senator Rosenwald. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. And we're at the Department of Corrections. No. Oh. Oh, I missed, I guess I was trying to hurry. Okay, 3 and 4.
Like to move Amendment 1427S,
Okay,
and if there's a second, I'd like to speak to it.
Senator Rosenwald,
Thank
second
you.
by Senator D'Alessandro.
So I think it was the last fiscal meeting, or the one before, there was an audit of the Liquor Commission. And one of the observations they brought forward that required legislative action had to do with the timing of when the liquor profits are transferred, the 5% to the Governor's Commission on alcohol and other drugs. There's a delay of 6 months, let's say. This last year, it accounted for over $1 million that was not transferred on a timely basis from the Liquor Commission to the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Other Drugs, where we deposit about $11 million a year. So about 10% of it was lagging. This amendment, which the fabulous Mike Hoffman came up with language, will speed up the transfer of those funds by saying there are 2 installments. The first one comes before August 1st at the beginning of a fiscal year, but then is trued up in January when the CAFR is published. So if the Liquor Commission still owes them more money, there would be a second transfer. If they transferred too much, the Governor's Commission would have to
Refund?
they would, yeah. So this addresses a legislative change needed from the audit finding presented to the fiscal committee.
Additional comments, Senator Bradley.
Have you run this amendment by Commissioner Malika?
I have not. They had a different approach.
I mean, it doesn't change the funding for the commission, it's just when the funding happens.
Mhm.
Right. Well, if we approve the D'Alessandro amendment, he won't complain about this.
Right. You won't complain about this. Yeah, we have this with education funding, we do it through back to the last thing. I think it's consistent with that.
So do we want to hold until we have a chance to get feedback from the commissioner?
I'm good with this.
Okay, so Senator Rosenwald moves, Senator D'Alessandro seconds. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Moving on to 4. Senator D'Alessandro. Discussion. Senator Bradley.
I'll second it. So at first when I saw this amendment, when I read House Bill 2, I thought, shouldn't this go to fiscal? And then I think at the end of the last fiscal hearing, we had a briefing from the Liquor Commission about, was it a store in Winchester maybe? And I ended up having a conversation with Commissioner Malika, and he walked me through the process, which I have to admit I was unaware of, that when there is the potential for a closure, rather than coming and having to get a vote of the fiscal committee beforehand, they get a briefing to the fiscal committee afterwards. So we ask the Liquor Commission to maximize revenue in a very competitive market for sale of wine and spirits. And I think we have been well rewarded by Commissioner Malika's, leadership over quite a while, frankly, and the general fund has done well. I think the current system works. He's going to have to come, or the commission's going to have to come and explain any potential closures and put up with the questioning that would come with it, and I'm okay with it, even though I thought initially when I read it, it should have a prior approval. So that's why I seconded your amendment.
Senator Rosenbaum.
Thank you. So they can close stores without telling anybody or getting any approval. And where that's been a problem is in areas of the state where people don't have access to cars. And for example, they closed last year the only downtown store in Nashua. And so if you live in Center City and you don't have a car, you're dependent on a kind of a long bus ride. But the House Bill 2 provision didn't change that. It just said you have to tell us how you're going to spread out the costs before you close the store. It didn't actually change requiring them to get permission to close the store. So I'm okay with this amendment, but I really think the Liquor Commission should also serve the people who live in New Hampshire and maybe don't, and are not so affluent, are not driving through on their way to the beach in Maine.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Roswell. Appreciate that.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to echo the sentiments of Senator Bradley, we asked the commission to do a good job. I think what's happened over the years is a vast improvement in the facilities, in the products, and in the service. And I agree, we lost a store in downtown Manchester, which was problematic. We have a lot of walking people also, but I think we ask him to do something, he delivers, and we take advantage of that. And we just approved something in the previous amendment, which again, the Liquor Commission is doing more to help in areas that we need. So it's, I think it's a delicate balance, but it's a balance that we have to maintain.
Further discussion? So we had a motion by Senator D'Alessandro, seconded by Senator Bradley. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. And now we can move on to correction. So,
Department of Corrections came before your committee without any new requests. On the very last page of their handout, they did make a statement about the appropriation for design of a new prison, $40 million, that was removed from the trailer bill by the House. And the commissioner, I believe her words were something to the effect of they would be happy with anything the committee could grant them.
A question for LBA, is the $10 million for design still in House
There-
Bill 2?
There is a $10 million appropriation for design and site planning.
Senator Del Sandro.
So just to follow up, the 10 million, you've said the 10 million is still in there. And there's no question that we need a change in the physical facility. I first visited the physical facility in 1958 when I was a student at the University of New Hampshire, when we had 300 inmates. And the warden knew every individual at the prison. And times have changed. The place is a mess. Those of us who have visited, I've visited on numerous occasions, met with inmates. The place is falling apart. And you got 2,000 people there, and we had a tragedy there last week, a real tragedy that we're correcting, hopefully, by putting the psychiatric unit on New Hampshire Hospital. But those of us who have visited that unit know that that's a significant problem. That whole thing is a real problem. I don't know if there's 40 million to be brought forth at this point in time, but 10 million to look at the design is reasonable. Remember, we did studies. I was on a commission. I hate to keep bringing up these bad tales, but in 1973, I was on a commission to study the correction system in New Hampshire, and we made recommendations in '73 about changing the location of the men's prison. I paid fairly decent amount of money for that study that's in the library. We ought to look at it and see what's happening as we go forward. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to make sure, the 10 million is in 23 funds or 24 funds?
I believe the 10 million is in 23 funds. The 40 million was in 24 funds, or for the biennium. And if you need details on the plan or anything, I think the Director of Administration is here.
Good afternoon. For the record, John Hanson, Director of Administration, Department of Corrections. And Senator, I found your 1973 report. So the 10, yeah, well, there was actually 2 reports from that time period, and yeah, it was, and on IBM Selectromatic, I think, so yeah, it was interesting. So the $10 million, as we discussed last time we were here, that will get us started down the road in a design. It's obviously a huge facility in the tune of up to $500 million in the end. We pay now or pay later. The 10% of the total cost for engineering is the standard around the country right now. So that's how we came up with the approximately $50 million that we would need for the complete design. That would be soup to nuts on the design. The 10 million will get us along the path. We can do some site evaluation and continue along the engineering path.
Okay, I think I want to caucus on this one, whether it's today or other. So that's going to go on hold for right now, so.
Mr. Chairman, I could just say, and Commissioner Hanks is not here, we're very grateful for anything that we can get for this. As Senator El Sandro and others have seen the facility, we're dealing with issues every day. My division will nurse along that facility until we build a new one. It'll be a Herculean task, but we'll get it done.
Okay. Health and Human Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Henry Lippman, the Medicaid Director for the state.
And Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer.
Go ahead.
All right. So before you, there's a 6-page document. It's the document on the legal size paper there. What I have done here is I put together all of the HB1 and HB2 requests that we discussed during the presentations the week prior. I've also included some additional reductions that we have identified as well. The document itself is separated into 5 major areas. The first section on pages 1 and 2 are the general fund requests. The page 3, this includes the no cost or general fund reductions. There is a total of approximately $60.7 million of general funds that we have identified. The bulk of that is coming from some new Medicaid rate projections based on numbers associated with the amendment number 10 for the MCO contract. There's also some additional contracts where we've identified additional federal funds that we'll be able to leverage to offset the general fund requests there. The third major section are the federal or other increases. Many of these are additional grants or other dollars that have come through during the biennium that have been approved by fiscal or grants that we expect to receive in the next biennium. The other section, these are HB1 and HB2 technical requests, is on page 5. And then finally, on page 6, that deals with some of the agency income revenue issue that I believe we discussed in the weeks prior. So with no further ado, I will begin on page 1, starting with the request. The first line, yes.
Karen, since you were involved in all these, why don't you come sit at the end of the table in case I need some assistance? I always need assistance, so. Go ahead while she's.
All right. On the first line there, you will see the SYSC overtime. The House had moved SYSC from HB2 to HB1. In so doing, they also zeroed out our overtime line. We're projected to have approximately $2.8 million in overtime spend this year that we've had to cover through various transfers. The next line, this is a new prioritized needs request that has not been funded to date. This is for a diversion program. Joe Ripsom spoke to this the week prior. This would essentially set up a statewide diversion program. Some communities currently have diversion programs. This would establish a statewide contract. The next item there, the reclass for the family service specialists. These are additional dollars that we project will be needed based on reclasses that are currently going through for these family service specialist positions. These are the individuals that make eligibility determinations for programming. The Glencliff home, this is the projected revenue shortfall that we're currently seeing with the current census of approximately 75 individuals. This is requesting a swap of general funds or replacing the other funds with general funds because we will not have enough income coming in as a result of the lower census. The next item is the TANF maintenance of effort. The House reduced our original amount by approximately $500 million of general funds each year. We may be able to work with this. We would much rather be on the safer side and request the $500,000 of general funds back each year in order to ensure that we can reach the maintenance of effort required for the TANF program. In the event we do not spend $32 million of general funds under TANF eligible expenses, then we may face an equal penalty and reduction in the subsequent year. So if you're short $500,000, you're likely going to be out $1 million the subsequent year. The next item there is juvenile peer-to-peer grief support. This is a new program, and we're requesting $1.5 million of general fund to fund a peer-to-peer grief support programming. This would be competitively bid and result in one or more contracts. The next item is the system of care, the residential rates. The funds requested here, these would fund the existing contracts that we have with, I believe, 16 providers in the community. And these rates are contracted. The reason that we're asking for additional funds here is originally we had assumed 50-50 spending of general versus federal or other funds. The actual experience to date, and these are relatively new contracts just in the past 2 years, The actual experience to date has been closer to 70% general funds, and we have also looked at the actual rates and costs that the facilities are claiming, and we've determined that they're not currently being reimbursed for their costs that they've experienced. The next item is an MOU with the Department of Safety. The Department of Safety by law is required to provide security services at New Hampshire Hospital and the state park, the Governor Hugh Gallen's state office park as well. The Department of Safety has had challenges in its staffing, and they've engaging in a series of reclasses. I don't know the exact status on that, but we are projecting approximately $156,000 increase as a result of the reclasses of their positions, which we would pay them through the MOU. The next request is an agency prioritized need that has not been funded to date. This is for crisis stabilization services as part of the 10-year mental health plan. If you turn to page 2, the $300,000 at the top is for the WIC supplemental program. This would increase access to local fresh fruits and vegetables. I believe we discussed this when Patricia Tilley from the Division for Public Health Services was here the week prior. The next item is the state phase down. These are payments that we make to CMS for dual eligible individuals. This is essentially a projected amount that we expect to have to pay. I believe, as we discussed previously, we recently transferred $10 million in the most recent department-wide transfer at Fiscal Committee to cover these costs that are currently not budgeted. The next item, as part of the alignment with HB 49, the department has been looking at the youth counselor positions and the job duties, education, and training requirements. As a result of that reclass, we are expecting almost a $2 million general fund increase in salary and benefits over the biennium associated with those positions. The next item, the postpartum 12-month coverage. At the end of the House phase, a bill from the prior session was added. In so doing, it appeared that there may have been funding only for approximately 1 year. This would add the additional funding for what we would need for the entire biennium, which would be consistent with the fiscal note submitted by the department. The next item is the shelter costs and homeless prevention services. We're requesting consideration for funding for those. I know SB 231 currently includes $8 million for shelter services and $2 million for prevention services. The department had originally requested $10 million for shelter services in each year of the biennium and $2 million of prevention services in each year of the biennium. So there's about a $14 million delta between those, but we're requesting consideration for any funding within that line. The voicemail solution for DCYF, this is resulting from some litigation challenges that we are currently having where we need to capture the voicemail. We can get transcripts, but we actually can't convert those into accessible data. This is funded. This did not come up during the House phase. This is a more recent solution that we've identified, and we're requesting funding for that purpose. Next up, I believe, I'm not sure if Employment Security has been here to speak to this yet. Kevin, do you know? Okay, they have not spoken to this. So as a result of the flooding at the Claremont District Office during the negative 40-degree wind chill nights, there was flooding. The building only recently opened up. There was major damage. During that time, the department moved our frontline staff into the New Hampshire Employment Security Office, and what we've discovered since we did that is both departments are seeing a great increase in the number of individuals coming through there. So by combining our resources in a new model, it seems to be having a better impact on the community. To fund the MOU with NHES, we are requesting some additional general funds to make payment to Employment Security to continue that model. The next item, the Federal Data Services Hub. Recently, we were notified by CMS that the department, along with every other state in the country that utilizes a central eligibility system, will begin to need to make payments beginning in state fiscal year 25. This is something that had not been identified previously. This is an estimate based on the information that we currently have available. And if you turn to page 3, these are the no cost or the no cost and general fund HB1 and HB2 reductions. The first major item there, which I spoke to already, this is a decrease in the Medicaid budget amount based on the new actuarial projections. Concurrently with that, we are also requesting that HB2 Section 213, which had originally appropriated $16.3 million of general funds plus matching federal for the continuous enrollment, that can be deleted as well. So these two items are very much a package. And again, this is based on the new projections that we have seen and the great success of the continuous continuous enrollment unwind that is already underway. The next item, we went out to bid for the care coordination contract. It came in lower than we had originally anticipated, so we've requested that there be a general fund and federal fund reduction there. Following that section is the targeted Medicaid rate increases. Section 231 of HB2 currently has a section where it appropriates general funds to the department, I believe in the amount of approximately $15.7 million. When Henry's team has been working with the actuaries and looking at the details, it appears that some of the appropriations in certain areas may not be feasible, and what we expect is that some of it may have potentially been over budgeted. And so we've submitted some language to the committee to allow the department a little bit of flexibility when it comes to setting those rates so that we can A, ensure parity, B, ensure that any contracted rate methodologies are taken into account, C, if there are upper payment level issues where we're unable to raise a rate above the Medicare rate, the language that we've submitted would provide us with that flexibility. The next item there is a reduction to the EMARS system. What we identified was a 90-10 federal match that we could take advantage of so that we could decrease the general funds here just in the past month or so. The next item, the department about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, entered into a contract for consultation services for strategic efforts. This is with A&M. We have submitted an APD, an advanced planning document, to the centers to CMS to better leverage federal dollars based on the pending approval, which we are pretty confident about. We will be able to save approximately $3 million in general funds there. The last two items are transfers between class lines that have a net zero impact on the budget. If you turn to page 4, most of the items here are items that we would otherwise come through fiscal. The first item there is a budget increase in the federal grant award, as well as moving for temporary full-time positions from funding currently provided by COVID grants into a core grant. The following item, adding funding from the Department of Environmental Services, and I believe last time there was a question as to whether this came out of the maybe forgetting this, the wastewater trust fund, and the answer was yes. The next item is funding from the Department of Environmental Services for an MOU with a lead remediation project. The next item is a federal grant award, or the SUID case registry is also a federal grant award as well. For the DCYF adoption services, we're requesting to be able to add federal funds for a contract that is needed. And then finally, currently in HB2, an appropriation, I believe of $1.5 million was made for IT consultants to the department. We are requesting authority to add the accept matching federal dollars without fiscal committee approval, which is generally fairly standard language, but we're putting that forward for consideration as well. Otherwise, we would just come back through fiscal at some point in time in the future. If you turn to page 5, this is the CCBHC planning grant that was recently approved by GNC and the fiscal committee. We were requesting that that be added to the state fiscal year 24 budget. And if we move to the next section, these are the other HB1 and HB2 requests. During the House phase, the House added a $23.4 million back of the budget cut. When they did that, they had based that language off of the current $22.6 million back of the budget cut, which was personnel only. Towards the late hours of one of the working sessions, the modification was made to allow the department to pay off that back of the budget cut or satisfy that back of the budget cut through other class lines other than personnel. However, the language, the reporting language was kept that would require the department to identify all of the class lines by September of 2023 and 2024. The challenge with that is we won't necessarily be able to predict which contracts are going to be underspent before the first quarter ends, so we're requesting consideration for a later reporting date. May 30th would be optimal. We would have the best sense of which class lines we would reduce by that point in time. The next item, previously in Chapter 91, Section 408, Laws of 2021, current HB2, the department was appropriated approximately $6.1 million to address emergency room boarding. The department is requesting an extension for that to allow it not to lapse at the end of the current biennium, but to be extended through June 30th of 2025. And some additional flexibility to allow us to better respond to what we expect to have resulting from the current litigation with the hospitals relative to ER boarding. The next item, the DD pilot. During this past legislative session, legislation appropriated funds to the department, but the department did not have sufficient time to implement that program. We're requesting that there be an extension to the chapter law to allow us to complete that work. The Data Privacy and IT Security Governance Board. This was another bill that was added during the House phase at the last minute. And it had assumed that it was a one-year bill, and that language was carried forward from the prior session. And there are some reporting requirements within that, and we're asking that those reporting requirements be pushed back 1 year to be consistent with the original intent. And there were 2 positions that were established with that, and funding for those positions was only provided in state fiscal year 25. So we're requesting those dates be consistent with the funding that was provided with those positions. The last item there relative to unclassified positions, the Department of Administrative Services can currently charge DHHS for any of the positions that go through the JCEC reclassification review process. The current language requires that the payment to DAS comes from a salary line appropriation. We budget our salary line appropriations to the dollar, so technically there are no funds in there without a transfer. Working with the Department of Administrative Services, we've requested that it be paid from an existing appropriation to allow us a little bit more flexibility to not result in an additional administrative task. The reason we're bringing this forward now is the Department of Administrative Services has never charged the department for this, and it's something they intend to do going forward. If you turn to page 6, this is the agency income revenue issue. So there were 2 sections in HB2 and HB1 where the House had directed general funds to be considered restricted revenue. When we worked with the Department of Administrative Services and collaborated with the LBA on this, the Department of Administrative Services has told us that essentially you can't budget general funds in an agency income line because it breaks the logic of the system. And so currently we have agency income budgeted for both the MMIS system as well as the DD, Acquired Brain Disorder Services, Children's In-Home Support Services accounts that we will not be able to earn. So as it currently stands, while the legislative intent is certainly clear, the accounting system cannot handle that. So our request is, and we're open to whatever solution. I will, of course, defer to the committee on this, but our request or our suggestion would be for MMIS to, one solution is to fund that out of an HB2 provision, similar to the way that the governor had originally had it. If that works, we're perfectly fine with that. But either way, we're requesting that the other funds be reduced in 24 and 25. In a similar vein, in the DLTSS world down below, we are requesting, this is a little different in the sense that the DD, the Acquired Brain Disorder account, and the Children's In-Home Support Services account, they are continually appropriated in non-lapsing. So currently, even though what you see in the governor's the House to Governor's Compare report, you'll see an additional $25 million of agency income there. That means we won't be able to earn that. That'll come in as zero, and then we'll lose the corresponding federal dollars. If the agency income and the federal revenue were decreased by equal amounts, we would actually be able to earn that revenue because these are continually appropriated accounts, and they would show up in the statement of appropriations. This is one solution. I am, of course, open to whatever solution works best. I just want to make sure that we have sufficient funds within the DD accounts to make sure that we can provide the services as required by RSA 171A. And that's a quick run through.
Okay, discussion. Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much. First page, section 227, TANF.
Yes.
I am assuming that if we are going to fund some child care initiatives out of the TANF reserve, that it's vitally important to fund this $2.5 million to make sure the TANF reserve has adequate cash and we're not penalized. Is that correct?
Yeah, so currently there's approximately $67 million of TANF reserve available. I would, of course, just want to make sure that we have sufficient general funds available to spend to ensure we get that full $38 million going forward in future years.
That's that question. So in looking at this document that I think is another version of this, in terms of homeless services, find it here for you. I think you made a request for, trying to find it. There's something in the range of $5 million over both years that would increase the number of beds. Or maybe it was in another document because I don't have it here.
It may have been a correspondence.
Yes.
Yeah, it probably was a correspondence.
So my recollection was if we increased homeless funding by about $5 million, that would enable you to open a significant number of new beds. Is that roughly accurate?
I believe there were a couple of options that we had presented, and I can dig that up and resend it to the committee. There were a couple of options. It's kind of a question of whether we would want to increase rates by a higher amount. Currently, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I think it's like $8.62 that we pay per night to shelter services via contracts, and they incur a cost of close to $43. So it's really a policy question of whether we would want to increase the nightly rate or increase the nightly rate by a slightly lesser amount and try to increase the number of beds available in the state.
I don't have it in front of me, but I thought that sure. Was, so yep. I think that would be helpful. The $400,000 on page 2 for postpartum, will that fund what's in, I believe it's Senate Bill 175 in the request?
I'll make it consistent with that, Senator.
Okay. All right, page 3, top line. The decrease in Medicaid budgeted amounts. I'm assuming that this is census related and that the projection for the need of services is quite a bit less, and that's where these reductions are coming from. Is that the case?
Yes, in what we have done is work with our actuary using most recent data available that's credible and forecasted what we thought the use and expenditures would be. And that's, you know, when we talked to you earlier, we hadn't had that information yet to be able to do all those calculations, and it turned out better than what we had thought it would.
So I'm assuming much of this is traditional Medicaid, not expansion.
This would be all traditional Medicaid.
All traditional.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, what we've seen is that traditional Medicaid is, in terms of expense structure, has done a little bit better than the Granted Advantage.
And what happens if projections are wrong and we've made this reduction and caseloads go up?
I think that we, in terms of have some level of confidence in our projections and have, I think, a pretty good track record of hitting those. Nothing is absolutely certain, but I feel reasonably confident we can manage to these numbers.
And the actuaries have recommended this?
They have given us our calculations are based on the information that the actuaries gave us.
Okay. If I can, I got a couple more, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
I don't know where it was, but the DCYF attorneys, I think you're asking for.
Senator?
DCYF, top of page 1?
No, I think you're reclassifying several attorneys and you need, is this page 2?
Senator Bradley, could I just go back for 1 second on the other item previously?
Yep.
I just wanted also for the public that may be listening in, the numbers that we have here do not include subsequent appropriations that you may make to raise rates that would increase the cost. That's built into whatever you would do there. So
we would need to, if we increase the rates, we would need to.
That appropriation would take care of the rate increases. I'm just saying that they're two separate pieces. There's the piece based on current rates and utilization expectations. Then if you appropriate new money for, as
Rate increases
as in the House HB2 as an example, those appropriations would lift those expenditures, but they'd be funded by the appropriation that you made.
And we would not have to reduce this, or increase this reduction, or reduce this reduction. We would not have to reduce the reduction.
Correct.
If that happens.
Correct.
With the enhanced rates. Okay.
Thank you, sorry about that.
So moving back to the 51 counselor positions, are these I think these are, correct me if I'm wrong, the DCYF attorneys that are objecting to this reclassification?
So the reclassification is in section 207 of HB2 as amended by the House, and that's where the $140,000 general fund appropriation is, and that's the 32 positions that would be converted from classified to unclassified. These positions here are separate. These are the youth counselor positions.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Okay, moving to page 6, and I probably have more questions, but I just want to hit some of the big ones. So the HB1 carry forward of the $25 million in the DD line, I think you said it, but I want to make absolutely certain if we reduce this expenditure, there should be no changes to the service level of what families that have a disabled child would expect to receive.
So if you were to, in state fiscal year '24, if you were to reduce the federal funds and reduce the $25 million in account 7100 in the DD account alone, and reduce the $25 million of other funds, you would actually be increasing, this is where it gets fun, you would actually be increasing the amount of funds for DD by $25 million because we cannot currently earn that $25 million in the agency income line. And so because this account and the other two accounts below it are continually appropriated in and non-lapsing, the funds in this current state fiscal year 23 would carry forward. And so just as a reminder, what the House had done in HB2 is they had taken general funds from state fiscal year 23, they treated that as restricted revenue, and they put that into agency income, which we can earn. So we would basically just have to write it down through the Department of Administrative Services. At the time, I don't think anybody in the room realized that we could not earn that revenue within the system, and this was something that was identified later after the fact. So we're just asking that it be corrected so we can make sure that we have funds available for that purpose.
But this, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, this reduces the total spend in the budget while actually allowing the department to increase funding for these services?
So because they are continually appropriated and non-lapsing, if there was a need that exceeded the amounts in the budget from the carry forward, we'd be able to use that carry forward funds. And currently HB2 is taking from those carry forward funds, moving them into 24, and we can't access those funds.
Okay.
It's fun.
Well, you're the smartest guy in the room, and hopefully you can, I probably will need it to be explained 2 or 3 more times so it gets into this squash up here, all right? And I'm assuming the same for the next 2?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Additional questions, Senator Rosenthal.
Thank you. I have a few. On page 1, the $11.5 million that you're looking for the system of care, I've spent a lot of time talking to the department about this. Am I correct in my understanding that some of these contracts are for court-ordered placements and some are not? Some kids are not getting services, some kids are getting sent out of state, and some kids are at Hampstead but can't be discharged to one of these lower level of acuity places because there aren't beds?
Yes, that is my understanding. Yes.
And the homeless funds, that $5 million that Senator Bradley was talking about, was that per year?
I would need to go back to the specific details of that correspondence just to make sure. My assumption is it would have been per year,
okay.
But I don't want to misspeak.
That was kind of my memory too. On page 3, the Medicaid, where you could save $40 million of general funds, what kind of caseload decline does that represent?
It represents operating approximately at pre-COVID levels, and I think that we're confident that that's where we're probably going to land to, is back to a more consistent than prior to the prior to the pandemic, if you will, March of 2020, when we started the continuous enrollment. We were at about 180,000, and that's about where we think we'll be.
Why didn't you bring this forward to the House or the governor?
Well, I think at the point of the governor's phase, we didn't know when.
You didn't know, but.
And at the House phase, the continuous enrollment requirements, we had no experience whatsoever with respect to what the unwind would exactly look like. We now have 2 months of experience under our belt, and it still was some ambiguity with respect to what we had to do. In February timeframe, we're still clarifying, kind of getting technical assistance. We didn't even know we'd be able to begin until I think it was probably beginning of April when we got our unwind plan approved by CMS, because some states, we were one of 5 states that were able to begin when we began, but the other 45 or 46 areas, some are starting this month and some are starting even later. So I think those are some of the uncertainties back at that point.
But could I?
Continue.
At what point do you have to renegotiate the contracts with the MCOs and possible rate increases? I mean, they're just actuarially driven increased costs are going to offset this. So this is caseload declines. This top line when might we see higher per member per month costs?
So I think these numbers reflect what we think we're going to be able to accomplish through our negotiations. We're right now in the middle of working on what we call Amendment 10, which is the rates that will go into effect for July 1st. So we've got a pretty good sense of what we have to work with and what we think is actuarially supported at this point, which is basically just 10 days old or so.
And has CMS approved those rates?
Those rates approvals come after that we enter into discussions with the MCOs and get governor and council approval. Then we submit the approved contract. I'm confident, based on what we have for actuarial experience, that we'll be able to come to an agreement on Amendment 10.
And I guess my last question right now is the unwind.
Yes.
As you've explained it, you have 2 months' experience. About 70% of the people, you're taking the people who are the low-hanging fruit first. But they have an appeals process that hasn't started yet.
Well, I think we've got some early indications on appeals as well in terms of what we're seeing, and it's my biggest fear going into this is going to be a lot larger than it's been. I think that's reflective of, hopefully, I've done good work up front, but it's been. I had real concerns that we would get overrun and that something may happen later on, but that's not happening now.
And I guess my last question is on the MMIS. So we're still going to have to pay these costs.
Yes.
But it's going to show up somewhere else, House Bill 2. But on the surplus statement, it's still going to be there. We're not avoiding the cost.
Correct.
By taking it out of House Bill 1 and moving it into House Bill 2. We're not actually shrinking the budget.
Right. I mean, it's a massive expenditure, but it's on a massive amount of claims. I mean, we're spending, I think, about between 2 and 2.5% of our claims cost to run the IT component, which is not I think an unreasonable amount. That when we talk about that's for the contracts for running the IT pieces, also staff that on top of that we pay for. But in terms of what we're paying to a vendor, it's surely expensive, and it surely had in its early stages, a lot of issues, but I think we still have some issues, but it's running a lot better. I think, again, if you had Commissioner Goulet here, he'd say it's running the best he's seen it run. And, you know,
But
so
it
it's-
doesn't really take it doesn't take the expense away, it just takes it out of house. Well, and finally, my last question, if I could, on the DD lines. So these are these holdover funds that were appropriated but not spent? Or are these new appropriations?
So there's an HB2 provision that indicates that from the state fiscal year carry forward, the 25 million, the 900,000, the 2.7 million would be moved into 24 and treated as restricted revenue. So because we can't earn that, we essentially lose that. And that's why we're requesting that one method of dealing with this is striking out the matching funds and the restricted revenue that we currently can't earn. Through that continually appropriated non-lapsing language, we would be able to utilize that. We certainly expect, depending on how the labor market looks in the next year or two, that all of those funds could potentially be spent, or something close to that. But right now, we believe that if we're able to carry and utilize all those funds, we will have sufficient funds for the biennium.
I guess that's where I was going. If we continue to appropriate money for people who are approved for services, but then we don't spend it, we're not going to earn the federal match if we don't actually spend this 25 million. Am I right?
Correct, yeah. If we don't spend it, no, we would not earn the federal dollars.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have real concern about the Glencliff home. That's just cash that we have to deliver. And the problem there is you can't get people to work there. We've closed sections of the home, and yet we're incurring significant expenses. And those expenses will continue because the length of stay at the Glencliff is at least a year, maybe beyond that. So we're talking about 1.1 million of general fund money that has to be pumped in there in order to keep that good. We have an obligation to those people, and we've got to stand up for that. And that's an occurring debt that keeps going. You know, that I believe on a monthly basis, you're incurring more and more debt all the time. I don't know how you flip that around, but that's a significant problem. You got to tell me how we deal with that. Somebody's got to tell me how we deal with that. And the other thing is TANF. You know, I've been around here since TANF was put in. We've always had problems with TANF, and we've been penalized on a number of occasions because of the way we've treated the TANF dollars. Do we run any risks of doing that at this point in time?
So the reason that we're requesting the additional $500,000 back is to mitigate that risk. During the House phase, and I can certainly provide this to the Senate if you would like it, we had provided where we budgeted our TANF dollars. And the problem with the way that we've budgeted in HB1 right now is we're assuming 100% filled rate for our positions that are paid out of TANF. We know that's not going to be the case, so we're going to be short there. There is agency income that may or may not be realized, so we may be short there as well. And the purpose of these funds is to make sure that we have adequate funds. These will likely be, if they were appropriated, they would likely be put towards cash assistance to make sure that we hit that MOE. And that's the reason why we've brought this forward, just to try to mitigate that risk as much as possible.
As I say, I've witnessed the risk and the repercussions because of the risk over the years. The last one is the MOU with the Department of Safety for Security. Those guys aren't on parity with troopers. They get paid less, and That's a concern I hear all the time. How do we rectify that? We did make the switch. We made them troopers. We did that a few years ago, but they don't get paid the same. How do we justify that?
I can't speak to the Department of Safety's budget, but it's my understanding that the reason we're seeing the increase here is because they did make those adjustments that you're speaking to, which is why we have this new projected need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions? Senator Bradley.
Yeah, maybe you could pass this to Nate. I don't know how you are able to stay on top of all of this. I think it's actually remarkable. So my compliments. So that's the homeless memo you sent us. So if I'm understanding that correctly, I think it was 2.7 per year would fund those additional beds in option 2.
So okay. So in the first two bullets up top, and I'll go back and verify this, I believe that would be if we, so just so everybody's aware of what I'm looking at. So we're looking at the assumptions from SB 231 that includes $8 million for shelter services and $2 million for prevention services. Were the $8 million in shelter services appropriated for the biennium ending June 30th, 2025, then we could increase the nightly bed rate from the $8 to the $20 per night, which would also allow us to fund an extra 850 year-round beds. In the second option, we could increase the rate from $8 to $25 a bed night and increase the number of beds by 500. So,
Okay, but either way, it's the $8 million that's in Senate Bill 231.
Correct. And these are just a couple of example of options. There's, of course, 100 more we could use.
Thank you. I really appreciate just everything you do.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none. How am I doing, Deb? Have I got more things I've promised people today?
No, this is it.
Okay. With that, I will take...
Just one more thing. It probably, Nate, would be a good idea to send this email again to Deb, and she'll circulate it to everybody on the committee.
I will resend that with clarification.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to come out of executive session. Moved by Senator D'Alessandro, seconded by Senator Pearl. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We are out of executive session. Our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned. Senator Pearl, you ready for a